In this lecture, I'd like to focus on the Raspberry Pi 3 and talk a little bit about its main features and characteristics. First of all, the large chip in the middle is a Broadcom chip that is a quad-core 64-bit ARM Cortex-A53 processor clocked at 1.2 GHz. And it's this chip here that makes this Raspberry Pi the fastest Raspberry Pi that's available currently. Inside this processor, there's also a graphics processing unit that runs at 400 MHz. So that's more than enough for the Raspberry Pi to play full motion, high resolution 1080p video. This is also where processing happens if you want your Raspberry Pi to do things such as face recognition and play three-dimensional games like Doom, which are all graphics intensive. In terms of memory, if you flip it over, we've got a chip here that gives us 1 GB of RAM available. Again, this is the Raspberry Pi with the most RAM available for our applications. It's the speed of the processor plus the available RAM that makes it possible for the Raspberry Pi 3 to work with operating systems such as the full version of Ubuntu and Windows 10. In terms of connectivity and communications, we've got 4 USB ports. All of them can operate as hosts, so you can connect mice and keyboards and external hard disks. We've got a 10 100 megabits per second Ethernet port. We also have integrated Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, which is the first Raspberry Pi that has this wireless capability. On the 40-pin connector, there are 17 GPIOs that we can use to implement specific functions with peripherals, which include things such as I2C and SPI communications and UART communications as well. Or we can use those GPIOs to plug in hats, as they're called. So these are boards that we can connect onto the Raspberry Pi to add with additional hardware capabilities like this. To power your Raspberry Pi, you've got a couple of options. The first one is to provide 5.1 or 5 volts power through the mini USB port here in the corner of the Raspberry Pi. Or you can connect external power to one of those two 5-volt pins in the top right corner of the Raspberry Pi. Just be careful though, because the Raspberry Pi doesn't have a power or voltage regulator. So the power supply that you use to power your Raspberry Pi must be a reliable one, must be a good quality power supply, because otherwise you will damage your Raspberry Pi. Unlike the Arduino, the Raspberry Pi, as I said, doesn't have the ability to regulate the voltage that you provide. And these are the most important hardware characteristics of the Raspberry Pi 3.